"Get off my plane, kid. First class isn't charity seating." The words sliced through the pressurized air of Apex Airlines Flight 447 like a blade through silk. Every conversation in the forward cabin stopped. Every head turned. Every eye focused on the woman who'd just declared war on a teenager. Patricia Hartwell stood in the galley doorway, her crisp blonde bob catching the overhead lights like armor. At 48, she wore her 20-year flight attendant badge like a crown, and her prejudice like perfume, subtle but suffocating. Her ice blue eyes locked onto the girl in seat 1A with the precision of a sniper. The target of her contempt was Zara Johnson, 17 years old, 5'4" of quiet determination wrapped in an oversized vintage band hoodie. Her natural hair was pulled back in protective braids, and she clutched a worn backpack that had survived countless coding marathons. Around her neck hung $400 noise-canceling headphones that Patricia immediately dismissed as knockoffs. Zara looked up from her phone where she'd been reviewing code from the MIT hackathon she'd just finished. 48 hours without sleep had left dark circles under her brown eyes, but her voice stayed steady. "I have a ticket for this seat." Patricia's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Honey 1A costs $15,000 for this leg. You look like you shop at thrift stores." The Boeing 777 was Apex Airlines' flagship aircraft, and Flight 447 to London Heathrow was their premium route. The first-class cabin featured 12 suites each worth more than most people's cars. Patricia had been working this route for 8 years, and she considered it her personal kingdom. She'd seen attempts before kids with fake boarding passes, adults trying to sneak upgrades, people who didn't belong in her domain. To Patricia, the curtain separating first class from economy wasn't just fabric. It was a moral boundary, and this girl with her ripped jeans and defiant posture had clearly crossed it. "Let me see your boarding pass," Patricia demanded, extending a manicured hand. Zara unlocked her phone and held up the digital ticket. The QR code gleamed clearly on the screen. Zara Johnson, Seat 1A, Priority Boarding VIP Status. Patricia snatched the phone without permission, a clear violation of passenger rights, and stared at the screen. The ticket looked legitimate, but Patricia's mind rejected what her eyes were seeing. This girl couldn't possibly afford first class. There had to be an explanation. "This doesn't scan." Patricia lied, not even attempting to scan it. "Where's your physical ticket?" Kids these days Photoshop these screenshots all the time to sneak upgrades. "I don't have a physical ticket," Zara said, her voice quiet but firm. "My dad's assistant booked it digitally. Can you please just scan it? I really need to sit down. I'm not feeling great." Zara was telling the truth about feeling unwell. The rush from the hackathon to the airport, combined with 48 hours of caffeine and no sleep, was triggering her asthma. The cabin pressure wasn't helping, and the stress of this confrontation was making her chest feel tight. But Patricia heard what she wanted to hear. Excuses from someone who didn't belong. "I'm not scanning a fake ticket," Patricia snapped, shoving the phone back toward Zara. "You're holding up boarding. I'm going to ask you once to move to your assigned seat in economy, or I'm going to have you escorted off the plane. I am in my assigned seat," Zara insisted, taking a step forward toward the seat she'd paid for. Patricia moved to physically block the aisle, her body becoming a wall between Zara and seat 1A. "Don't you dare push past me. That's assault on a flight crew member. That's a federal offense." The confrontation was drawing attention. In seat 1B, Elena Santos, a 34-year-old business consultant returning from a conference in New York, looked up from her laptop. She was a single mother who'd worked her way up from poverty, and something about this scene felt wrong. Very wrong. For God's sake, called Robert Mitchell from seat 2A, a 52-year-old investment banker who just wanted his pre-flight champagne. "Just scan the girl's ticket or move her. We have a schedule." "I'm handling security, sir," Patricia said, flashing him a practiced smile before turning her glare back to Zara. "Last chance. Economy. Now." In seat 3C, Sarah Kim, a 29-year-old tech journalist with 100,000 social media followers, quietly activated her phone's camera. Something about this felt like a story waiting to happen. Zara's breathing was becoming more labored. She reached into her hoodie pocket and Patricia's eyes went wide. "She's reaching for something!" Patricia shrieked, jumping back dramatically. Zara froze her hand halfway to her inhaler. It's for my asthma." "Put it away," Patricia commanded. "I don't know what that is. You're acting erratic and aggressive." "I'm calling the air marshal." "Aggressive," Zara whispered, looking around the cabin in disbelief. "I'm just standing here. You're refusing crew instructions. That is aggression." Patricia grabbed the intercom phone on the galley wall. "Captain, we have a level 2 security threat in the forward cabin, requesting immediate assistance from the air marshal." Zara's eyes went wide with panic. "Wait. No, please. My dad, just call my dad. His name is Marcus Johnson. I don't care if your daddy is the president," Patricia hissed. "You picked the wrong flight to play games on." What Patricia didn't know was that Marcus Johnson wasn't just any father. He was the founder and CEO of Phoenix Industries, a technology conglomerate worth $12 billion. More importantly for everyone on that plane, Phoenix Industries owned 60% of Apex Airlines. But Zara never got the chance to finish explaining. Officer Diego Rodriguez had been napping in row 4 when Patricia's call came through. At 35, he was 6'2" of compressed aggression stuffed into a cheap suit. His buzz cut looked like a weapon, and his 8 years as an air marshal had taught him to see threats everywhere, especially when they came in packages that didn't fit his narrow worldview. Rodriguez was groggy, irritated, and had a headache from the cabin pressure. When he arrived at the front of the plane, he saw exactly what he expected to see: a red-faced flight attendant pointing at a black teenager who didn't belong. "What's the situation?" Rodriguez barked, his hand already moving to his restraints. "She's attempting to steal a first-class seat using a forged digital pass, refusing to move to economy, and she made a threatening motion toward me with that object," Patricia recited, pointing at the inhaler Zara still held in her trembling hand. Rodriguez turned to Zara. His training should have told him to de-escalate, to investigate, to ask questions. Instead, he saw confirmation of his biases. "Misstep off the aircraft. Now! I have a ticket," Zara pleaded, holding up her phone again with a shaking hand. "Please, just scan it. Why won't anyone scan it?" "We don't scan forgeries," Rodriguez said, grabbing Zara's upper arm with a grip that would leave bruises. "Let's go." "Ow! You're hurting me!" Zara yelped, trying to pull her arm back. "Resisting arrest," Patricia shouted. "See, I told you she was violent. I'm not resisting!" Zara cried out, real panic setting in now. Her chest was tightening rapidly. The air in the cabin felt thin and insufficient. I need my inhaler. Please." In seat 4A, James Torres, a 41-year-old off-duty pilot for Continental Airlines, stood up. He'd been watching the situation with growing concern. "Hey, wait a minute. Did anyone actually check the passenger manifest?" "Sir, please take your seat," Rodriguez commanded without looking away from Zara. "This is protocol violation," Torres continued. "You're supposed to verify. Sit down." Rodriguez shouted, spittle flying from his lips. Elena Santos had seen enough. She pulled out her phone and started recording. "I'm filming this," she announced loudly. "This is being documented. Ma'am, recording isn't permitted without consent," Patricia said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "Neither is discrimination," Elena shot back. Sarah Kim was already live-streaming to her followers. "We're on Apex Airlines Flight 447, she narrated quietly, and we're watching a flight crew assault a teenager." But Rodriguez was beyond listening to reason or witnesses. He saw a black girl in a hoodie being aggressive, and his training, or lack thereof, kicked in. "Drop the object," he commanded, referring to Zara's inhaler. It's medicine, Zara gasped, her breathing becoming more labored. I have asthma. Rodriguez slapped the inhaler out of her hand. It skittered across the galley floor and slid under seat 1B just out of reach. No, Zara gasped, dropping to her knees to reach for it. Rodriguez interpreted this as a combat move. He tackled her. The sound of a 17-year-old girl hitting the galley floor was a dull, sickening thud that seemed to echo through the entire cabin. A collective gasp went up from the passengers. Someone screamed. Hey. Elena Santos stood up, her phone still recording. That is a child. Get off her. Sit down, ma'am, or you'll be detained too, Rodriguez shouted, pressing his knee into Zara's back. Zara was small, barely 110 pounds. Rodriguez was over 220. The weight pressed the air from her lungs, and without her inhaler, she couldn't get it back. I can't breathe. Zara wheezed, her face pressed against the rough airline carpet. You have enough breath to talk. You can breathe. Rodriguez recited the dangerous fallacy that had killed too many people in custody. James Torres pushed past Patricia, his pilot authority overriding her protests. Get off her. She's having a medical emergency. But Rodriguez was committed to his course of action. He reached for his belt and pulled out zip-tie handcuffs, the heavy-duty plastic restraints used for unruly passengers. He yanked Zara's arms behind her back at an awkward angle that made her shoulder pop audibly. Zara screamed in pain. Stop fighting, Rodriguez yelled, cinching the zip ties so tight they cut instantly into her skin, cutting off circulation to her hands. Check the passenger list, Elena screamed, her phone capturing every second. Just check the damn list. Patricia, finally realizing the situation was spiraling beyond her control, walked over to the crew computer terminal. Her hands shook as she typed, expecting to prove everyone wrong. She scrolled to seat 1A, expecting to see vacant, or maybe Smith John. Her heart stopped. The screen read 1A, Johnson Zara. Status VIP, do not disturb. Affiliation board family member. Emergency contact Marcus Johnson, CEO, Phoenix Industries. Patricia's face went white. The color drained so quickly she looked like she might faint. She looked at Zara, who was now pinned to the floor, zip-tied, gasping for air like a fish on dry land. The girl's lips were turning blue, and in that moment Patricia Hartwell realized she had just made the worst mistake of her life. The silence in the cabin after Patricia's realization was deafening. She stared at the computer screen, reading the words over and over as if they might change board family member. Emergency contact Marcus Johnson, CEO, Phoenix Industries. Rodriguez was still kneeling on Zara's back, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred in Patricia's world. Zara's breathing was becoming more shallow, more desperate. The zip ties around her wrists had cut off circulation, turning her hands purple. She's turning blue! Elena Santos, called out, her voice cracking with panic. She'd never stopped recording, and her live stream was beginning to gain traction. Someone needs to help her breathe. Sarah Kim's follower count was climbing rapidly as word spread across social media. The hashtag Apex Airlines was starting to trend, though none of them knew it yet. Patricia looked from the computer screen to the girl on the floor, her mind racing through calculations. Maybe she could fix this quietly. Maybe she could make it go away before anyone found out who Zara really was. Rodriguez, she whispered urgently. Let her up. Now. What Rodriguez looked confused, sweat beading on his forehead from the exertion of restraining a 110-pound teenager. I said, let her up. Patricia's voice was sharper, now edged with desperation. But Rodriguez was committed to his narrative. In his mind, he'd prevented a security threat, and backing down now would mean admitting he was wrong. His ego wouldn't allow it. She assaulted a crew member, Rodriguez said loudly, playing to the audience of passengers. She's staying restrained until we reach the gate. James Torres knelt down next to Zara, his pilot training kicking in. Miss, can you hear me? How long since you've had your inhaler? Zara managed to whisper, "Under seat." Torres immediately crawled under seat 1B, retrieving the inhaler that Rodriguez had knocked away. But with Zara's hands zip-tied behind her back, she couldn't use it. "She needs her hands free to use this," Torres announced. "This is a medical emergency. She's faking," Rodriguez declared. Standard procedure for criminals trying to avoid arrest. Robert Mitchell had seen enough. The investment banker stood up his expensive suit and authoritative bearing, commanding attention. "Officer, I'm Robert Mitchell, senior partner at Goldman Sachs. I've been flying for 30 years, and this is not standard procedure. You've assaulted a minor without verifying her identity." "Sir, please return to your seat," Rodriguez said, but uncertainty was creeping into his voice. Elena Santos spoke up from behind her phone camera. "I've been recording this entire incident. The girl never once became aggressive. She asked repeatedly for her ticket to be scanned, and you refused." More passengers were standing now, forming a wall of witnesses. An elderly woman in row 2, Margaret Foster, clutched her pearls and whispered to her husband, "Harold, they're torturing that child." Patricia knew she had to act. The situation was spinning out of control, and every second that passed was another second closer to corporate disaster. She walked over to Rodriguez, her voice urgent but quiet. "Diego, listen to me. We need to release her immediately." "Like hell we do," Rodriguez shot back. "She's been combative from the beginning." "Combative." Elena Santos's voice cut through the cabin like a blade. "She's been polite and quiet this entire time. We all saw it." Zara's breathing was becoming more labored. Without her inhaler, and with Rodriguez's weight restricting her chest expansion, she was going into respiratory distress. Her lips had gone from pink to blue to nearly purple. James Torres stood up, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years in aviation. "I'm declaring a medical emergency. This passenger is in respiratory failure, and if she doesn't get treatment immediately, she could die." The word "die" sent a chill through the cabin. Passengers began murmuring anxiously, and several more phones appeared recording the scene from multiple angles. Patricia felt the walls closing in. She'd seen Zara's status on the computer. She knew who the girl's father was. And she knew that Marcus Johnson wasn't just wealthy, he was vindictive when it came to protecting his family. "Rodriguez, release her now, or I'm calling the captain," Patricia threatened. But Rodriguez had dug in too deep to back out now. "You called me here to handle a security threat. That's what I'm doing." Sarah Kim's live stream viewer count had passed 50,000 and was climbing rapidly. Comments were flooding in. "Call the police. This is police brutality. Someone help that girl. What airline is this?" The situation was about to explode across social media, but none of them knew that the real explosion was already on its way. 3 miles away in the Phoenix Industries corporate headquarters overlooking Manhattan, Marcus Johnson's executive assistant, Linda Rodriguez, was monitoring her boss's daughter's flight status. It was something she did for all family travel, a safety protocol Marcus had implemented years ago. When she noticed that Flight 447 was delayed with no explanation, she called the airline's operations center. "This is Linda Rodriguez calling for Marcus Johnson regarding Flight 447. Why is the departure delayed?" The operations manager, Frank Williams, recognized the name immediately. "Ms. Rodriguez, we show a security situation on board. Nothing to worry about, just standard procedures." Linda's blood ran cold. Zara was the only family member on that flight. "What kind of security situation? I don't have details. Let me call down to the aircraft." But Linda had already hung up and was sprinting toward Marcus's corner office. Marcus Johnson was in a video conference with the London team when Linda burst through his door without knocking, something she'd never done in 8 years of working for him. "Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation with Zara's flight." Marcus's expression changed instantly from mild annoyance to sharp focus. "What kind of situation?" They're saying security incident, but no details. Flight 447 is delayed on the tarmac. Marcus was already standing, his mind shifting into crisis mode. Get me the captain's direct line. Get airport security on standby, and get the legal team ready to move. He ended the video call without explanation and grabbed his jacket. His daughter was in trouble. Back on the aircraft, Zara's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The combination of asthma panic and physical restraint was creating a perfect storm of medical crisis. Elena Santos was still recording her voice, providing commentary for viewers. This is absolutely insane. They're torturing a child because she's black and wearing casual clothes. I need everyone to step back, Rodriguez commanded, but his authority was crumbling. Too many witnesses, too many cameras, too much evidence of his mistakes. James Torres ignored the command and knelt beside Zara again. Miss, stay with me. Help is coming. But Zara's eyes were starting to flutter closed. The lack of oxygen was causing her to lose consciousness. She's passing out, Elena screamed. Someone call 911, Margaret Foster. The elderly woman in row 2 stood up with surprising strength. Young man, you release that child right now, or so help me God, I'll make sure you never work again. My husband is Judge Harold Foster of the Second Circuit Court. Rodriguez looked around the cabin and for the first time seemed to register that he was surrounded by witnesses, cameras, and people with power. But he was in too deep to back out now. Everyone needs to remain calm, he said, though his own voice was shaking. Patricia made a decision. She couldn't save Rodriguez, but maybe she could save herself. She walked to the intercom and picked up the handset. Captain, this is Patricia. We need paramedics on standby. We have a passenger experiencing medical distress. But it was too late for damage control. Zara had gone completely limp, her breathing so shallow it was barely visible. And in the distance through the aircraft's small window, Elena Santos saw something that made her heart race. A convoy of black SUVs was racing across the tarmac toward their aircraft, followed by airport security vehicles with flashing lights. Oh my God, she whispered, still recording. Someone's coming. Someone big is coming. Patricia followed her gaze and felt her stomach drop into her shoes. She recognized those vehicles. They belonged to Phoenix Industries' executive security team. Marcus Johnson was on his way, and when he arrived, nothing would ever be the same. The convoy of black SUVs came to a screeching halt just outside the aircraft's main cabin window. Elena Santos zoomed her phone camera toward the tarmac, capturing the moment for her rapidly growing audience of online viewers. Holy shit, she whispered, then caught herself. Sorry for the language, but you guys need to see this. The lead SUV's door swung open, and out stepped a man who commanded attention without saying a word. Marcus Johnson was 45 years old, 6'1", with the kind of presence that made corporate boardrooms go silent. Even in his business casual attire, dark slacks, and a perfectly fitted navy polo, he radiated the quiet authority of someone who signed billion-dollar deals before breakfast. Behind him emerged a small army, his head of security, 2 paramedics with full medical gear, and 3 individuals in expensive suits carrying briefcases that screamed legal team. Airport Operations Manager Frank Williams was running to keep up, talking rapidly into his radio. All units Priority 1 clearance for Phoenix Industries team. Clear the tarmac immediately. Back in the aircraft cabin, Patricia Hartwell felt her world collapsing in real time. She'd spent 20 years building her career, and now she was watching it disintegrate because she couldn't scan a teenager's boarding pass. Rodriguez was still kneeling on Zara's back, but the girl had gone completely limp. Her breathing was so shallow that James Torres had to put his ear close to her face to confirm she was still alive. She's barely breathing, Torres announced to the cabin. This is critical. Sarah Kim's live stream had exploded to over 200,000 viewers as word spread across social media platforms. The chat was moving too fast to read, "Someone call the police. This is murder. Who is this girl? Why won't they help her?" Elena Santos kept her camera steady, providing play-by-play commentary. "The girl has been unconscious for nearly 5 minutes now. The air marshal is still restraining her, and now there's some kind of security team approaching the aircraft." Through the cabin speakers came the pilot's voice, Captain Reynolds sounding confused and concerned. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a brief delay due to an operational situation. Please remain in your seats." But nobody was remaining in their seats anymore. Half the first-class passengers were standing watching the drama unfold. The curtain between first class and economy had been pulled back, and passengers from the main cabin were craning their necks to see what was happening. Robert Mitchell, the Goldman Sachs partner, had his own phone out now, making calls. "David, it's Robert. I need you to short Apex Airlines stock immediately, whatever position you can get. Trust me on this one." Margaret Foster, the federal judge's wife, was practically vibrating with rage. "Harold, call the FBI. This is a civil rights violation happening in federal airspace." Her husband, Judge Harold Foster, was already dialing. "This is Judge Foster. I need to report a federal crime in progress aboard Apex Airlines Flight 447. Patricia knew she was running out of time. The computer screen still showed Zara's status board family member, CEO's daughter, VIP protection level. She walked over to Rodriguez one more time, her voice urgent and desperate. "Diego, I need you to listen to me very carefully. That girl is the daughter of Marcus Johnson. He owns this airline. He owns Apex Airlines." Rodriguez looked up at her with sweat dripping down his face. "What do you mean he owns the airline? I mean, he literally owns 60% of the company. Her father is the CEO of Phoenix Industries, and you just assaulted his daughter on his own airplane." For the first time, uncertainty crept into Rodriguez's expression, but his ego wouldn't let him admit he'd made a mistake. She was aggressive. She was resisting. Elena Santos heard this exchange and made sure her camera captured it. "Did you hear that, everyone? The girl they've been torturing is the daughter of the man who owns the airline, and they still won't let her breathe." Outside the aircraft, Marcus Johnson was moving with purposeful speed. The paramedics flanked him as they approached the boarding gate, their medical equipment ready. Linda Rodriguez, his assistant, was running alongside them, phone pressed to her ear. "Security is clearing the aircraft. We have direct access to the forward cabin. Medical team is standing by." Marcus's expression was stone cold, but those who knew him could see the fury building behind his calm exterior. His daughter was on that plane, and someone had hurt her. As they reached the jet bridge, Marcus turned to his head of security, David Kim. "I want every camera angle, every witness statement, and every communication recorded. This is going to court." The legal team was already working phones out, documenting everything. Lead attorney Sandra Martinez spoke rapidly: civil rights violation under federal statute. False imprisonment. Assault on a minor. We'll have enough for both criminal charges and a $100 million lawsuit. Back in the cabin, Zara had been unconscious for nearly 8 minutes. James Torres was genuinely afraid she might die. "Her pulse is weak," he announced. "She needs immediate medical intervention." Rodriguez was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. The convoy outside the security team, the obvious wealth and power approaching the aircraft, it was all starting to register. But instead of releasing Zara, he doubled down. "Nobody moves until I understand what's happening here," he declared. Elena Santos's live stream chat exploded. "He's going to kill her. Where is the pilot? Someone stop this." Sarah Kim was providing her own commentary. "We're witnessing what appears to be the torture of a minor aboard a commercial aircraft. The security team outside suggests this victim has some kind of high-level protection." Margaret Foster had had enough. The 72-year-old woman marched over to Rodriguez and pointed a perfectly manicured finger at his face. "Young man, I am Margaret Foster. My husband is Judge Harold Foster of the Second Circuit Court. If that child dies while you're kneeling on her, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your life in federal prison." Rodriguez looked around the cabin and finally seemed to grasp that he was surrounded by people with serious power and connections. But his training and ego had locked him into a course of action he couldn't abandon. The aircraft's main door suddenly opened with a pneumatic hiss. The first person through was David Kim Marcus Johnson's head of security, 6'3" of former Special Forces precision. He assessed the scene in seconds, unconscious girl on floor, zip-tied and restrained, turning purple around the lips. Paramedics forward cabin now, he commanded into his radio. Behind him came the medical team carrying emergency oxygen and resuscitation equipment. And finally, Marcus Johnson himself stepped onto his own aircraft. The cabin fell completely silent. Marcus didn't need to announce himself. His presence filled the space like a change in atmospheric pressure. He looked around the first-class cabin, taking in every detail: the frightened flight attendant, the kneeling air marshal, the unconscious teenager zip-tied on the floor, his daughter, his baby girl, turning blue because she couldn't breathe. When Marcus spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, and absolutely terrifying in its calm intensity. "Everyone step away from my daughter. Now." Rodriguez looked up at him, finally understanding that his career and possibly his freedom was over. "Sir, I was responding to a security threat. The flight crew reported I said step away from my daughter." Marcus's voice hadn't risen by a single decibel, but the authority behind it was unmistakable. This was a man who gave orders to Fortune 500 executives, who moved markets with his decisions, who wielded the kind of power that could destroy lives with a phone call. Rodriguez slowly stood up, his hands shaking as he realized the full scope of his mistake. The paramedics immediately moved in, one of them cutting the zip ties, while the other prepared emergency oxygen. Zara's wrists were purple and swollen where the restraints had cut off circulation. "Oxygen saturation is critically low," the lead paramedic announced. "We need to intubate." Marcus knelt beside his daughter as the medical team worked. His voice, which had been hard as steel moments before, became soft and gentle. "Zara, sweetheart. Daddy's here. You're safe now." Elena Santos continued recording, tears streaming down her face. Her viewer count had passed 500,000 as the story exploded across social media platforms. "This is the father," she whispered to her audience. "This man owns the airline, and they tortured his daughter because she's black and wearing casual clothes." The hashtags were already spreading: Zara Johnson, Apex Airlines, racial profiling, justice for Zara. But Marcus Johnson wasn't thinking about hashtags or social media. He was watching his daughter fight for her life because of prejudice and stupidity. As the oxygen mask went over Zara's face and her breathing began to stabilize, Marcus stood up and turned to face Patricia Hartwell and Diego Rodriguez. His expression was calm, controlled, and absolutely deadly. "Gentlemen," he said to his security team, "arrest them." The words hung in the air like a judgment from above. Patricia Hartwell's legs nearly gave out as she processed what Marcus Johnson had just said. Diego Rodriguez looked around desperately as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. "You can't arrest us," Rodriguez stammered. "I'm a federal air marshal. I was doing my job." Marcus turned to face him with the kind of calm that preceded corporate executions. "Your job was to protect passengers, not torture teenagers." David read them their rights. David Kim Marcus's head of security stepped forward with the bearing of someone who'd handled much more dangerous situations. "Patricia Hartwell and Diego Rodriguez, you're being detained for assault, false imprisonment, and violation of civil rights under federal statute." "This is insane," Patricia protested, her voice cracking. "She didn't have proper identification. She was being combative." Elena Santos's phone camera captured every moment as she provided live commentary to her now 700,000 viewers. "The airline owner is having his own employees arrested. This is unprecedented." James Torres, the off-duty pilot who'd tried to help Zara, stepped forward. "Sir, I tried to tell them to check the passenger manifest. They refused to verify her identity." Marcus nodded to Torres with genuine gratitude. Thank you for trying to help her. I won't forget that." The paramedics had stabilized Zara's breathing and were preparing to transport her. The lead medic, Jennifer Walsh, looked up at Marcus with professional concern. "She needs immediate hospital care. The prolonged oxygen deprivation could have caused organ damage. We need to move her now." Marcus's jaw tightened. His daughter, his brilliant, beautiful daughter who just won a full scholarship to MIT, was going to the hospital because two people couldn't be bothered to scan a boarding pass. "Take her to Presbyterian," he instructed, "and make sure she gets the best care available. Cost is not a factor." As the medical team carefully loaded Zara onto a stretcher, her eyes fluttered open briefly. She looked up at her father with confusion and fear. "Daddy," she whispered through the oxygen mask. Marcus took her hand gently. "I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe. These people will never hurt you again." Sarah Kim's live-stream chat was moving so fast it was unreadable. "Sue them all, press charges. Justice for Zara, burn it all down." Captain Reynolds appeared at the cockpit door, having finally left his post to see what was happening in his cabin. The 55-year-old pilot had been flying for 30 years, but he'd never seen anything like this scene. "Mr. Johnson," he said carefully, recognizing the airline's owner. "I wasn't informed about the severity of the situation. If I had known," Marcus held up a hand to stop him. "Captain Reynolds, this isn't your fault. But I need you to document everything. Every communication, every protocol violation, every decision that led to my daughter being tortured on your aircraft." As Zara was wheeled off the plane, Marcus turned his attention back to Patricia and Rodriguez. His legal team, 3 of the best civil rights attorneys in New York, were already taking statements from witnesses. Sandra Martinez, lead counsel, approached Marcus with an initial assessment. "We have multiple felony violations here. Federal assault charges, civil rights violations under the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and enough for a massive lawsuit." Patricia tried one last desperate gambit. "Mr. Johnson, please. I was just following safety protocols. I've been with this company for 20 years. I have children. I made a mistake." Marcus studied her with the cold calculation of someone who'd destroyed competitors for less. "You didn't make a mistake, Ms. Hartwell. You made a choice. You chose to see my daughter as a threat because of her race. You chose to humiliate her instead of doing your job. You chose to call security rather than scan a ticket." Elena Santos was still streaming her phone, capturing every word. "This is justice happening in real time, people. These two are about to learn what happens when you torture the wrong teenager." Robert Mitchell, the Goldman Sachs partner, stepped forward. "Mr. Johnson, I want you to know that I witnessed the entire incident. Your daughter was polite, respectful, and never once became aggressive. This was pure racial profiling." Margaret Foster nodded emphatically. "My husband is a federal judge, Mr. Johnson. We've already contacted the FBI about this incident. These people will face federal charges." Marcus thanked them both, then turned to his security team. "I want every passenger's contact information. I want their statements documented. I want every phone recording preserved as evidence." Rodriguez made one final attempt to save himself. "Sir, you have to understand we get threats all the time. I was just being cautious." "Cautious." Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than shouting. "You zip-tied my 17-year-old daughter until she lost consciousness. You denied her medical treatment. You tortured a child because she was black and wearing a hoodie." The words hit Rodriguez like physical blows. He was finally beginning to understand not just what he'd done, but who he'd done it to. Marcus continued, his voice still deadly calm. "Do you know what I do when someone threatens my family? Mr. Rodriguez, I destroy them. Completely, utterly. I erase them from existence." Sandra Martinez stepped beside Marcus with preliminary legal documents. "Criminal charges are being filed as we speak. Federal prosecutors are already involved. This will be a major case." As airport security led Patricia and Rodriguez away in handcuffs, Patricia made one last plea. "Please, Mr. Johnson, I'll lose everything. My house, my pension, my career. I made a mistake, but please don't destroy my life." Marcus looked at her without an ounce of sympathy. "You should have thought about that before you tortured my daughter." The cabin was now filled with FBI agents, airport police, and corporate investigators. Flash photography lit up the galley where Zara had been restrained, documenting evidence for what would become a landmark civil rights case. Elena Santos finally ended her live stream after 3 hours, but not before addressing her 1.2 million viewers one final time. What we witnessed today was attempted murder disguised as security. But we also saw what happens when power protects the powerless. Justice is coming. As the aircraft was cleared and processed as a crime scene, Marcus sat alone in seat 1A, his daughter's seat, and called his wife. "Diana, I need you to meet us at Presbyterian Hospital. Zara's hurt. She's going to be okay, but I need you there." His wife's voice came through shaky with fear. "What happened? How bad is it?" Marcus looked around the now empty first-class cabin, seeing his daughter's blood on the carpet where she'd been forced down. "Someone hurt our baby because of the color of her skin, but they picked the wrong family to terrorize." As he left the aircraft, Marcus paused at the door and turned back to look at the scene one more time. This wasn't just about his daughter anymore. This was about every black child who'd been profiled, every person of color who'd been dismissed, every victim of prejudice who'd been told to stay quiet. The people who hurt Zara had unknowingly declared war on one of the most powerful men in America. And Marcus Johnson always won his wars. 6 months later, the consequences of Flight 447 had rippled through the aviation industry like a tsunami. What started as one man's refusal to scan a boarding pass had become a federal case that would reshape how airlines treat passengers forever. In the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan, Patricia Hartwell sat at the defendant's table in a cheap suit from Target, the only clothing she could afford now. Her 20-year career was over. Her pension was frozen. Her house was in foreclosure. Everything she'd built had crumbled in the 6 months since she'd refused to treat a teenager with basic human dignity. Across the courtroom, Diego Rodriguez wore an orange jumpsuit. He'd been held without bail since his arrest, charged with federal assault, civil rights violations, and endangerment of a minor. His wife had filed for divorce. His children wouldn't speak to him. His life as he'd known it was over. At the prosecutor's table sat federal attorney Michael Rodriguez and the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. They'd taken the case personally after video footage showed a federal air marshal torturing an unconscious teenager. The gallery was packed with reporters, civil rights activists, and aviation industry executives who'd come to witness the conclusion of the most significant airline discrimination case in decades. But the most important person in the courtroom was sitting in the front row, Zara Johnson. She'd recovered from her physical injuries, the damaged shoulder had healed. The circulation had returned to her hands, her asthma was under control. But the emotional scars were deeper. She still couldn't fly without panic attacks. She still woke up some nights feeling like she couldn't breathe. Yet here she was, dressed in a sharp blue suit, ready to face the people who'd nearly killed her. Judge Catherine Williams called the court to order. "We're here for sentencing in United States v. Rodriguez and Hartwell. Will the defendants please rise?" Patricia and Rodriguez stood shakily, both of them shadows of their former selves. The prosecutor spoke first. "Your Honor, these defendants didn't just assault a passenger. They tortured a child because of racial prejudice. They denied medical treatment to someone having an asthma attack. They very nearly killed a 17-year-old girl because she was black and wearing casual clothes." Elena Santos was in the gallery, having flown in from San Francisco specifically for this moment. Her live stream of the incident had been viewed over 50 million times and had sparked a national conversation about airline discrimination. Sarah Kim sat beside her, typing rapidly for her tech publication. The story had launched her career to new heights, but she'd never forgotten the terrified look in Zara's eyes that day. Judge Williams turned to Patricia first. "Ms. Hartwell, you were entrusted with passenger safety. Instead, you chose to profile and humiliate a child. Your actions led directly to her near-death experience." Patricia's lawyer, a public defender named Tom Walsh, stood to speak. "Your Honor, my client recognizes the harm she caused. She's lost her career, her home, and her reputation. She asks for the court's mercy." But Judge Williams wasn't interested in mercy. "Ms. Hartwell's civil rights aren't negotiable. Basic human dignity isn't optional. You sentenced this child to torture because of her race. Sentence 5 years federal prison followed by 3 years supervised probation." Patricia collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Her children in the gallery looked away in shame. Rodriguez's sentencing was harsher. "Mr. Rodriguez, as a federal officer, you were held to a higher standard. You tortured an unconscious child. You denied medical treatment to someone in respiratory distress. You weaponized your authority against an innocent teenager. Sentence 12 years federal prison, no possibility of parole." Rodriguez didn't react. He'd known this was coming. But the criminal case was only the beginning. In a conference room 50 floors above the courthouse, Marcus Johnson was meeting with the board of directors of Apex Airlines. The airline he partly owned had become a symbol of corporate racism, and the financial damage was catastrophic. Stock prices had dropped 60%. Boycotts had cost them millions in revenue. Major corporate clients had canceled contracts. The airline was hemorrhaging money and reputation. Board member William Foster spoke first. "Marcus, we understand your anger, but the entire airline is suffering because of the actions of 2 employees. Marcus looked around the table at faces that represented billions in wealth and influence. These people had been his partners for years, but today they were obstacles to justice. "William, my daughter, nearly died on one of our aircraft because of institutional racism. This wasn't 2 rogue employees. This was a culture that allowed prejudice to flourish." Chief Financial Officer Maria Santos presented the financial reports. "We're looking at $150 million in direct losses. The civil lawsuit alone could bankrupt us." Marcus nodded calmly. "Good. Sometimes structures need to break before they can be rebuilt properly." What the board didn't know was that Marcus had been quietly purchasing additional shares through shell corporations. He now owned 87% of Apex Airlines, giving him absolute control. Effective immediately, "I'm implementing new policies," Marcus announced. "Every crew member gets bias training. Every passenger interaction is recorded. 0 tolerance for discrimination. And we're creating a $50 million fund for discrimination victims across the aviation industry." The civil lawsuit had been settled out of court for an unprecedented amount. While the exact figure was sealed, legal experts estimated it exceeded $200 million, the largest discrimination settlement in aviation history. But money couldn't undo what had happened to Zara. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, Zara's therapist, met with her twice weekly to address the trauma. "PTSD is common after experiences like yours," she'd explained. "Your brain is protecting you from perceived threats." Zara had missed months of school. Her MIT scholarship was deferred while she recovered. The brilliant coding prodigy who'd won hackathons couldn't concentrate long enough to write basic programs. "I used to love flying," Zara told her father during one of their conversations. "Now I can't even think about airports without feeling like I'm suffocating." Marcus felt each word like a knife to his chest. His daughter's dreams of studying at MIT, of building the next generation of technology, had been derailed by ignorance and hatred. But Zara was stronger than anyone knew. During her recovery, she'd started working on something new. Using her coding skills and her traumatic experience, she was developing an application called SafeFly, a platform that would allow passengers to document discrimination in real time and connect with legal resources immediately. "If this happened to me with all my family's resources, imagine what happens to kids who don't have protection," she told her father. "I want to build something that helps them." The app included features for recording incidents, automatically backing up videos to cloud storage, connecting users with civil rights lawyers, and reporting patterns of discrimination to federal agencies. Major civil rights organizations had already expressed interest in partnering with SafeFly. The NAACP, the ACLU, and the Southern Poverty Law Center were helping to fund development and legal support. Meanwhile, the ripple effects continued to spread through the industry. The FAA had implemented new regulations requiring bias training for all airline personnel. The Department of Transportation was conducting industry-wide audits of discrimination complaints. Congress was holding hearings on passenger rights. Patricia Hartwell's fall from grace had been swift and complete. The woman who'd once prided herself on maintaining standards in first class was now serving her sentence in federal prison in Connecticut. Her cellmate, Maria Rodriguez, was serving time for tax evasion. "What did you do?" she'd asked Patricia on her first day. "I refused to let a black girl sit in first class," Patricia had answered quietly. Maria had stared at her in disbelief. "You're in federal prison because you wouldn't let someone sit in a seat they paid for." Patricia had just nodded, finally understanding the magnitude of her choices. Diego Rodriguez's experience in prison was harsher. Former law enforcement officers weren't popular with other inmates. He spent most of his time in protective custody replaying that day over and over in his mind. He'd received one letter since his imprisonment from his ex-wife informing him that she'd changed their children's last name. They didn't want to be associated with what he'd become. The letter had ended simply, "You tortured a child. Our children are ashamed to be related to you." But the most significant change was happening at Apex Airlines itself. Under Marcus's direction, the airline had become a model for inclusive practices. Every employee went through extensive bias training. Customer service representatives were required to scan boarding passes immediately upon request. Discrimination complaints were investigated by an independent board. The airline had hired Dr. Angela Washington as their chief diversity officer, making her the most powerful diversity executive in the aviation industry. Her first initiative was implementing the Zara protocol, named after Marcus's daughter, which required immediate medical attention for any passenger in distress. Flight attendants now carried cards with the protocol, "Passenger safety comes before company image." Medical needs supersede seat assignments. Human dignity is non-negotiable. The financial recovery had been slower than the cultural changes, but it was happening. Corporate clients who'd fled during the scandal were gradually returning, drawn by Apex's reputation as the most progressive airline in America. More importantly, discrimination complaints had dropped to nearly zero. The combination of training, accountability, and culture change was working. 1 year after the incident, Zara felt ready to fly again. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus Johnson's Manhattan office as he reviewed the latest SafeFly development reports. His daughter's app had exceeded every expectation, reaching 10 million downloads in just 6 months since its launch. But today wasn't about business metrics or user engagement rates. Today was about healing. Zara entered the office carrying 2 coffee cups, her father's usual black coffee and her own vanilla latte. At 18 now, she'd grown into the confident young woman she was always meant to be. But the experiences of that day had added depth to her character that went beyond her years. "Ready for this?" Marcus asked, though he was clearly more nervous than she was. "I've been ready for months, Dad. You're the one who keeps finding reasons to delay." Marcus smiled despite his anxiety. Zara had inherited his determination, but she'd also developed something he was still learning: the ability to transform pain into purpose. "The plane is ready when you are," he said, gesturing toward the window where a Phoenix Industries corporate jet sat on the tarmac at Teterboro Airport. Zara shook her head. "We talked about this. If I take the private jet, they win. If I hide from commercial airlines, I'm still letting fear control my life." She was right, and Marcus knew it. but the thought of his daughter walking onto another commercial aircraft still made his chest tight with protective anxiety. JFK to London Heathrow. Zara continued. The same route. The same airline. I need to take back what they tried to steal from me. Marcus studied his daughter's face, seeing the same quiet strength that had sustained her through months of therapy, through the trial, through the development of SafeFly. She wasn't the same girl who'd been terrorized on Flight 447. She was stronger, more focused, more determined to use her experience to help others. Apex Airlines has changed, he reminded her. Dr. Washington has completely transformed their culture. The crew training is exemplary now. I know, Dad. You've told me about every policy change, every training session, every cultural shift, but I still need to prove to myself that I can do this. 2 hours later, they stood in the departure lounge at JFK International Airport. Terminal 4 was bustling with the usual chaos of international travel, but to Marcus, every face looked like a potential threat to his daughter. Zara noticed his tension and took his hand. Dad, breathe. I'm going to be fine. At the Apex Airlines check-in counter, the transformation was immediately obvious. The agents wore new uniforms with small pins that read, Dignity First, part of Dr. Washington's rebranding initiative. Digital screens displayed the company's new mission statement. Every passenger deserves respect, safety, and dignity. The agent behind the counter. Michelle Torres recognized them immediately. She'd been specifically trained on the Johnson case as part of her orientation. Ms. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, welcome back to Apex Airlines. It's truly an honor to serve you today. Zara smiled genuinely. Thank you. I just need to check in for Flight 447. Michelle's training kicked in immediately. Of course. May I scan your boarding pass? Zara held out her phone, and Michelle scanned it without hesitation. The computerized system immediately displayed Zara's VIP status, but more importantly, it displayed a note that Dr. Washington had personally added, Valued passenger. Ensure exceptional care. You're all set, Ms. Johnson. Seat 1A is ready for you. Captain Martinez asked me to let you know that he's personally flying this route today in your honor. As they walked toward security, Zara noticed the changes everywhere. Digital displays showed Apex's commitment to diversity and inclusion. Posters featured employees of all backgrounds with the slogan, Respect Takes Flight. But the real test would come when she stepped onto the aircraft. Flight 447 was the same Boeing 777 that had been the scene of her trauma, but everything else had changed. The crew uniforms featured the new Dignity First pins. The safety video included segments on passenger rights and respectful treatment. Most importantly, the crew had been hand-selected by Dr. Washington herself. Chief Purser David Martinez greeted them at the aircraft door. He was a 15-year veteran who'd volunteered to retrain under the new protocols specifically to be part of Zara's return flight. Ms. Johnson, welcome aboard. I want you to know that every member of this crew has been personally trained on the new Apex values. Your comfort and safety are our highest priorities. Zara felt her chest tighten as she entered the cabin, not from asthma this time, but from the flood of memories. The galley where she'd been forced to the ground. The seats where witnesses had watched her suffer. The spot where her inhaler had been knocked away. But she also saw the changes. New carpeting had been installed. The galley had been redesigned. Most importantly, the atmosphere was completely different. Flight attendant Sarah Kim approached with a warm smile. Ms. Johnson, I've read about your experience, and I want you to know that what happened to you will never happen again. We've all been trained to put passenger dignity first. Elena Santos, who'd flown in from San Francisco specifically for this milestone flight, was seated in 2C. She smiled and gave Zara a thumbs up. Robert Mitchell, the Goldman Sachs partner who'd witnessed the original incident, was in his usual seat 2A. He nodded respectfully as Zara passed. As Zara settled into seat 1A, she felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a flight to London. This was reclaiming her space, her dignity, her right to travel without fear. Marcus sat in 1B, still protective but trying to give his daughter space to heal on her own terms. Captain Martinez's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Martinez. Today's flight carries special significance for Apex Airlines. We're honored to have Ms. Zara Johnson aboard, the remarkable young woman whose strength and courage have helped transform our industry." The cabin erupted in spontaneous applause. Passengers turned to smile at Zara, recognizing her from the news coverage. But these weren't looks of pity or curiosity. They were looks of admiration and respect. Ms. Johnson's experience led to changes that have made flying safer and more dignified for everyone, the captain continued. Today we fly not just to London, but toward a future where every passenger is treated with the respect they deserve. As the aircraft taxied for takeoff, Zara felt her phone buzz with notifications. SafeFly users around the world were sending messages of support. "Flying fearless because of you. Thank you for making travel safer. Your courage changed everything." But the most meaningful moment came when flight attendant David Martinez approached her seat during cruise flight, "Ms. Johnson, I wanted to personally thank you. Before the changes your case brought about, I'd witnessed discrimination many times but felt powerless to stop it. Now we have protocols that protect passengers and empower crew members to do the right thing." Zara looked up at him with genuine gratitude. "That's why I had to take this flight. Not just to prove I could, but to see the changes working." As London approached, Zara realized something profound had happened during the flight. For the first time since the incident, she'd flown without fear. Not because she'd forgotten what happened, but because she'd transformed it into something positive. The landing was smooth, and as passengers began to deplane, many stopped to speak with Zara. An elderly black woman named Grace Washington approached with tears in her eyes. "Honey, I've been flying for 60 years, and I've experienced things that would break your heart. What you've done, the changes you've brought about, they mean the world to people like me." A young Hispanic father traveling with his teenage son stopped to shake her hand. "My boy here wants to be a pilot someday. Because of what you've done, I know he'll be treated fairly in this industry." As Zara walked through Heathrow Airport, she felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year: complete freedom of movement. No anxiety about being judged, no fear of discrimination, no worry about whether she belonged. She'd reclaimed not just her seat on the aircraft, but her right to take up space in the world without apology. Marcus watched his daughter with overwhelming pride. She'd taken the worst experience of her life and transformed it into a force for change that would protect millions of travelers. "How do you feel?" he asked as they collected their luggage. Zara considered the question seriously. "Like I can breathe again. Really breathe." That evening in their London hotel, Zara received a call that would change everything again, but this time in the best possible way. "Ms. Johnson, this is Dr. Sarah Robertson from MIT. We wanted to inform you that based on your work with SafeFly and your advocacy for civil rights, you've been selected for our presidential scholarship. Full ride plus funding for SafeFly development." Zara looked at her father through tears of joy. She was going to MIT after all. But more than that, she was going with purpose, with experience, and with the knowledge that she could turn pain into progress. The girl who'd been handcuffed until she passed out was now the young woman who would help ensure it never happened to anyone else. 2 years after Flight 447, the ripple effects of that day continued to reshape lives across the country. Patricia Hartwell sat in the visiting room of Federal Correctional Institution Danbury, staring across a scratched plastic table at her daughter Jennifer. It was the first time Jennifer had visited in 8 months. "How are the kids?" Patricia asked, though she dreaded the answer. Jennifer's expression was cold. "They don't ask about you anymore, Mom." Emma changed her last name to Davis. Dad's middle name. She doesn't want to be associated with what you did." Patricia nodded, accepting another consequence of her choices. At 50, she looked a decade older. Prison had aged her rapidly, but it was the weight of shame that had really broken her down. "I saw her on the news again," Jennifer continued. "Zara Johnson. She's at MIT now, building some kind of technology company. She's doing TED Talks about overcoming discrimination." Patricia had seen the coverage, too. The girl she'd tried to humiliate had become a national symbol of resilience and progress. Every article about Zara's success felt like another reminder of Patricia's regret. "Jenny, I know I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know Mom, stop." Jennifer's voice was firm. "I didn't come here for apologies. I came to tell you that we're moving to Seattle. Dad got a job offer, and frankly, we need a fresh start away from this scandal." Patricia felt her world get smaller. Her children, her grandchildren, everyone she'd loved was moving on without her. The life she'd built over 50 years had collapsed because she couldn't see a black teenager as equal to herself. 300 miles away in the maximum security wing of FCI Coleman, Diego Rodriguez was learning what it meant to be completely broken. His cellmate had been transferred the previous month, leaving him alone with his thoughts and regrets. Rodriguez had lost everything. His wife had remarried. His children used their stepfather's name. His law enforcement pension was gone. His appeals had all been denied. But the worst part wasn't the isolation or the violence of prison life. It was watching the news and seeing how the world had moved on without him, how the changes implemented after his actions were actually working. Airlines reported massive reductions in discrimination complaints. The training programs inspired by Zara's case had become industry standard. His moment of prejudice had accidentally created a better world that he'd never be free to enjoy. A guard appeared at his cell door. "Rodriguez, you have mail." It was rare for him to receive correspondence. His family had cut contact completely. His few friends from law enforcement had distanced themselves from the scandal. The letter was from an unexpected source, James Torres, the off-duty pilot who'd tried to help Zara that day. "Diego," it read, "I'm writing because I believe in redemption, even for people who've done terrible things. What you did was unforgivable. But if you're serious about making amends, there are ways to help from where you are. Prisoners Against Prejudice is an organization that uses the stories of people like you to educate others. If you're interested in preventing other families from experiencing what you caused, contact them." Rodriguez stared at the letter for hours. It was the first glimmer of hope he'd felt since his arrest. Maybe he couldn't undo what he'd done, but perhaps he could prevent someone else from making the same choice. Meanwhile, Zara Johnson was thriving in ways that seemed impossible 2 years earlier. The MIT campus in Cambridge had become her second home, and her dormitory room was filled with whiteboards covered in code for SafeFly 2.0. The app had evolved beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a documentation tool for airline discrimination had become a comprehensive platform for reporting prejudice across all industries. Hotels, restaurants, retail stores, and corporations were all being held accountable through SafeFly's crowdsourced oversight. The beauty of technology, Zara explained to her MIT classmates during a presentation, is that it can level playing fields that have been uneven for centuries. When discrimination happens in public, everyone becomes a witness. SafeFly's impact was measurable and profound. Discrimination complaints processed through the app resulted in a 93% resolution rate compared to traditional complaint structures that rarely led to meaningful action. Major corporations were proactively reaching out to SafeFly to implement bias training and accountability measures, preferring to address problems before they became public relations disasters. Zara's personal transformation was equally remarkable. The trauma that had once triggered panic attacks now fueled her determination to protect others. She'd found purpose in her pain, turning her worst experience into her greatest strength. "I used to have nightmares about being handcuffed," she told her therapist during one of their sessions. Now I dream about building programs that make those handcuffs impossible." Dr. Jennifer Martinez smiled at her patient's progress. "You've done something remarkable, Zara. You've transformed victimhood into leadership." Marcus Johnson had watched his daughter's transformation with awe and pride. The scared teenager who'd been terrorized on his airplane had become a confident young woman changing the world. Phoenix Industries had partnered with MIT to fund SafeFly's development, but more importantly, Marcus had learned to step back and let Zara lead her own revolution. "She doesn't need me to protect her anymore," he told his wife Diana over dinner. "She's protecting everyone else now." Apex Airlines had become the most respected carrier in the industry under Dr. Angela Washington's leadership. The company's stock had not only recovered but reached record highs as passengers chose to fly with an airline that prioritized dignity and respect. The Zara Protocol had been adopted by airlines worldwide, and discrimination incidents in aviation had plummeted to historic lows. Elena Santos had parlayed her live stream of Flight 447 into a career as a civil rights journalist. She now worked for the Washington Post, covering discrimination cases across the country and using her platform to amplify voices like Zara's. "That day changed my life, too," Elena reflected during a recent interview. "Watching injustice happen in real time made me realize that bearing witness isn't enough. You have to act." Robert Mitchell, the Goldman Sachs partner, had quietly become one of the largest financial contributors to SafeFly's development. His investment firm had also created a fund specifically for supporting civil rights technology startups. "I was ashamed of my initial reaction that day," he admitted privately. "I was annoyed by the delay instead of horrified by the injustice." Zara's courage taught me that comfort isn't more important than conscience. The broader aviation industry had been fundamentally transformed. The Federal Aviation Administration had implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination regulations. Flight crews underwent mandatory bias training. Passenger rights were prominently displayed in every cabin. More than policies had changed, culture had shifted. A generation of airline employees had been trained to see passengers as individuals deserving respect rather than potential threats to be managed. Dr. Washington, now considered the leading expert on aviation diversity, was invited to speak at conferences worldwide. "The Zara Johnson case didn't just change one airline," she often said. "It changed an entire industry's understanding of what customer service really means." At 18 months into her MIT program, Zara received an invitation that would have seemed impossible during her darkest moments after the incident. The White House Office of Science and Technology Policy wanted her to serve as a youth advisor on digital civil rights initiatives. Her experience and expertise in using technology to combat discrimination had caught the attention of federal policymakers. "They want me to help develop national standards for bias reporting technology," Zara told her father during one of their weekly calls. Can you believe that Marcus could believe it? His daughter had proven that individual trauma, when transformed into collective action, could reshape entire industries. The girl who'd been handcuffed until she passed out was now being invited to help write the policies that would protect future generations from similar treatment. The invitation came with a full scholarship continuation and the opportunity to fast-track her computer science degree while working with federal agencies. It was vindication beyond anything Marcus had imagined when he'd rushed across that tarmac 2 years earlier. As Zara Johnson walked across the MIT campus toward her meeting with White House representatives, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years ago, she'd been a scared teenager gasping for breath on an airplane floor. Today, she was a national leader in civil rights technology. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been months of therapy, sleepless nights reliving the trauma, and moments when she'd wondered if she'd ever feel safe traveling again. But with each line of code she wrote for SafeFly, with each discrimination case the app helped resolve, she'd reclaimed a piece of herself. Her phone buzzed with a notification from SafeFly. Another case had been successfully resolved: a black family who'd been denied service at a restaurant in Alabama. The app's automatic legal notification feature had connected them with civil rights attorneys, and the restaurant had already issued a public apology and implemented bias training for staff. "One more family doesn't have to suffer in silence," Zara whispered to herself. That was what made everything worthwhile. Not the accolades or the speaking invitations or the MIT scholarship, but knowing that her pain had prevented someone else's. As she entered the campus building where federal representatives waited to discuss her advisory role, Zara thought about Patricia Hartwell and Diego Rodriguez. She'd learned through news reports that Rodriguez was now working with Prisoners Against Prejudice, using his story to educate law enforcement officers about unconscious bias. Patricia had written her a letter from prison, the first of several, apologizing and asking how she could make amends. Zara had responded with grace, explaining that the best amends were the changes already happening across the industry. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting Zara had written back. It's about ensuring that the lesson learned from pain creates protection for others. The meeting with White House officials lasted 3 hours. They wanted Zara to help develop federal standards for bias reporting technology across all industries. Hotels, restaurants, retail stores, law enforcement agencies everywhere. Discrimination occurred, there could be a SafeFly-style organization to document it and demand accountability. As she walked back to her dormitory that evening, Zara realized something profound. She was no longer defined by what had happened to her on Flight 447. She was defined by what she'd chosen to do about it. Her story had become bigger than her trauma. It was about resilience, justice, and the power of transforming pain into progress. The girl who'd been told she didn't belong in first class was now helping to redesign the entire structure to ensure everyone belonged everywhere they had a right to be. Dignity, she'd learned, wasn't something you could buy with a $15,000 ticket. It was something every human being deserved simply by virtue of existing. And thanks to SafeFly, thanks to the changes in aviation, thanks to federal policies being written with her input, that dignity was now better protected for millions of people. The handcuffs that had once silenced her voice had become the catalyst that amplified the voices of everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. If you've ever been discriminated against, dismissed, or denied the respect you deserve, remember Zara's story. Your voice matters. Your dignity is non-negotiable, and sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the foundation for the most important changes we can make. This story proves that one person's courage can reshape entire industries. Zara turned her trauma into a movement that protects millions of travelers today. Her SafeFly app continues to document discrimination and connect victims with justice, ensuring that no one suffers in silence. What we witnessed wasn't just about airline discrimination. It was about the power of standing up when everything seems stacked against you. It was about transforming pain into purpose and proving that dignity isn't determined by the color of your skin or the clothes you wear. The next time you see injustice happening, remember that your phone can be a weapon for justice. Your voice can be the difference between someone suffering alone and someone getting the help they deserve. Don't be a bystander when you can be a witness for change. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that courage can come in any package and justice can emerge from the darkest moments, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that like button to help this story reach others who might be facing their own moments of discrimination. And subscribe to this channel because stories like Zara's need to be told, need to be shared, and need to inspire the next generation of changemakers. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful stories of resilience and justice to light. Because when we share these stories, we remind the world that dignity isn't negotiable, respect isn't optional, and sometimes the people who try to break us end up helping us build something stronger than they ever imagined. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring, and remember, your voice matters.